physically today?
We're both in
California.
California.
I'm in the Central Valley, which the Fresno area, very strong Portuguese American community where we live at, agriculture, dairy, in that related world where we have two Portuguese American congressmen from two different parties, Congressman Costa, Jim Costa, and Devin Nunes, who's quite famous.
Oh, sure.
And Devin's very, and then Angela's in the Bay Area,
in Fremont.
In Fremont, San Francisco.
So we are live. So we're going to go ahead and get started.
Right.
So hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Politicus as a podcast, but we're actually going live on Facebook with this one. So welcome to those of us joining on Facebook as well. My name is Angela Simoes, and I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Denise Borges.
Hey,
how are you?
How are you, my most awesome chairperson in the whole entire universe and beyond?
Right. We're really excited for today. It's a topic we've never touched on, Denise, but something that's very relevant in our social and political climate right now. Our guest today is Attorney General of Rhode Island, Peter Noronha, or Noronha, I think is the Portuguese pronunciation, if I did that correctly.
Yes, you did. Proud of you.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Attorney General Noronha, for joining us today. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be on with you.
So before we jump into the meat of the discussion, can you just give us a little bit of your background and, growing up, and then how you became, your path to becoming Attorney General?
So I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island called Jamestown, which is connected today by a bridge to Newport. But when I was growing up in my early years by a ferry system, which all of my relatives mostly worked on, including my father and grandfather. And the family history is that my great-grandfather came from the Azores at around 1900. The family records aren't all that great. But he came over then and settled originally in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, but came to Jamestown shortly thereafter. And my grandfather came to Jamestown when he was 3. My father was born there in 1929. He's still alive, God bless him, at 91. And I was raised there as well. Small town, 5,000 people. My great-grandfather was a fisherman, a commercial fisherman. My father and grandfather worked on the ferries that connected Jamestown to Newport. So really a Portuguese and Irish community growing up of working people. And so that's the environment in which I was raised. So I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, go to college and graduate from college, and later to law school. Went to Boston College undergraduate, Boston College Law School. When I graduated from law school, I lived for a time in Boston. I joined a very large Boston law firm called Goodwin Procter. Today it has about 800 lawyers worldwide. Then it had about 400. And really it was an opportunity for me to learn from some really top flight lawyers. I had some student loans that I needed to get paid off, and couldn't quite do public service right away. But once I had that issue kind of taken care of and felt like I was ready to move on, I joined the Rhode Island Attorney General's office as a line assistant attorney general. In 1996, in 2002, I became an assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor. In 2009, President Barack Obama appointed me as the United States attorney for the District of Rhode Island. Some of my former colleagues, very close to Belinda Haig out in the Bay Area, was one of my colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's Office. There were 3 U.S. attorneys 4 U.S. attorneys, in California. Ben Wagner was one. Andre Barat was another, now a federal judge. So we had a lot of great colleagues out there. And then in 2018, after leaving as U.S. attorney, President Trump took office. I ran for and was elected the 74th Attorney General for the state of Rhode Island, and I've served since January 1st of 2019. My wife's an internal medicine physician. We have 2 children. One is in medical school himself, who just started in St. Louis, and the other is a undergraduate student at Brown University. So that's the background of who I am and how I got here.
That's amazing. Quite a path. So when we talk about law enforcement reform, it's obviously been a really hot topic lately. Tell us about your approach and your philosophy when it comes to law enforcement reform, and maybe some of the initiatives that you have started in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so a lot of this goes back to my time as U.S. attorney, and Look, when you're a line prosecutor, as I was, a state and federal prosecutor on the line, I mean, you're really focused on your caseload that's in front of you, and you don't really have an opportunity unless frankly, you're a little more, maybe a little more engaged than I was at that point in my career to really get up to 50,000 feet and think about the larger implications of what it is you were doing. And we really had the chance in the Obama administration, I think, in this country to begin thinking about some of those other things. And so what do I mean by that? So when I was an assistant United States attorney in the Bush administration, our marching orders were to charge the most readily provable, most serious offense with every sentencing enhancement in every case, no matter the individual circumstances. So it didn't matter sort of the age of the defendant or what their criminal history was or the circumstances of the crime. You had to charge everything all the time. And so we weren't able to really tailor our charging decisions to the specific individual characteristics of each case. Look, it was an easy place for a prosecutor to be because you knew exactly what you had to do. You didn't have to make any choices. But I don't think that does justice, and neither did the president, and neither did the attorneys general who I served. And so we shifted to a place of giving prosecutors discretion to tailor the charging decisions and the sentencing recommendations to better fit the circumstances of each case. And I think that leads to a better place for justice. So that's sort of part of it, rethinking how we handle individual cases, not think of them as one size fits all, but to really do an individualized assessment. But we also, we called it at the time the three-legged stool because there were two other significant pieces to criminal justice reform when I was in the Obama administration as U.S. attorney. One was prevention, which was to prevent crime in the first place and to divert people out of the criminal justice system. We frankly had more success here in my office now than we did then. And the other piece was reentry, so that when people are getting out of the prison, what role do prosecutors have in making sure that people, when they get out of prison, get to a place where they're less likely to go back into it. And that's a win-win for everybody. When somebody reoffends, you have to reincarcerate them many, many times. And that's a cost. It's an economic cost. It's a cost to society. There's potentially another victim. And so you have another victim involved. So we really focused on those three areas. When I became Attorney General, I was able to take some of those principles and really adopt them in ways that I could really, now I don't really report to anyone other than the people of the state of Rhode Island. I had much more freedom to sort of craft what it was we were doing along the lines of what I thought was appropriate. So here in Rhode Island, for example, we brought that same charging discretion to the office. So we're charging here on average 5,000 cases a year. So in every one of those cases, I want my folks that are making those charging decisions to think very carefully about what each case is. So I don't want to undercharge, but I don't want to overcharge. But we're also working really hard at prevention. So we've established, we had a diversion program here, which was really hard to get into. And what a diversion program is basically if you're sort of a first-time offender or a young offender, it keeps you out of the criminal justice system by puts you on a different path. So basically, if you need to get a job, you get one. If you need to finish your education, you get one. If you need substance abuse counseling, you get it. If you need to pay restitution, you do it. And if you do all of those things and kind of, you're on that knife's edge, but you can tip yourself back into sort of the right place, then your case is dismissed and you avoid getting a criminal record. Well, that was a program that existed only internally in the office when I started, and we had very few people in it. So if you were a URI student and you sold a marijuana joint to another student at URI, you were a drug dealer and you couldn't get into our program. I think our program is exactly the kind of place where that student needs to be. Look, that's conduct that shouldn't happen. It's not, it's not going to change the state of our democracy. That's a case that belongs in our diversion program. So we really made that program more robust and expanded it. What we also did was we worked with the General Assembly to create a diversion court where those kinds of cases can not only get into a diversion program, but have court intervention. And I think there's a lot to be gained by having a judge guiding these cases. And so that's a significant thing that we've done on sort of the prevention side. Really, the idea there is to keep as many people out of the criminal justice system as possible. And today, about 10% of our pending cases are in diversion. So I think that's a significant step forward for us.
One quick question, if I may, as kind of a follow-up to what you talked about your time at the U.S. Attorney's Office. If you look at it now, since you've left 4 years later, the direction is different, obviously, than what it was 4 years ago. And with some criminal justice reform that's been done at the federal level, how do you look at it today versus 4 years ago from your perspective, Attorney General?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that this administration, you know, if I'm being candid with you, and I look at
Sure.
what the Justice Department has done over the last 4 years, um, I think, how do I put this? They have focused on what I believe the administration would call, um, you know, following the rule of law and, you know, going after violent crime. You know, I think U.S. attorneys' offices, you know, I was a federal prosecutor for nearly 15 years. What the U.S. attorney's offices should be focused on, what the Department of Justice should be focused on all the time, are cases that cross state borders, that cross international borders, dealing with cartel related or linked drug trafficking organizations that spread drugs throughout our country. They should be involved in cyber intrusions. They should be involved in high stakes political corruption matters. I think where this Department of Justice has gone, I think they focus, I think, on the low hanging fruit in many ways.
Mm.
You know, they've done cases that DAs and attorneys general, and in Rhode Island, we are effectively the DA. We don't have DAs here. So they've really done cases that, you know, this office can do, frankly, just as well. There are some cases we can't do as well. You know, if we were doing a wiretap in Rhode Island on a drug trafficking organization, as soon as that organization gets outside of Rhode Island, they're really beyond the scope of our ability to reach them. The U.S. Attorney's Office can reach those drug trafficking organizations much more easily. And I just think there's been a shift away from sort of what ought to be the core mission of the department to areas that are frankly best left to state and local prosecutors. And I think part of that is because there has been this this notion of trying to send this signal that we're focused on violent crime. And I just think that's missing the true mission of the department in a lot of ways from where I sat and where I experienced that again as a line assistant, you know, back in the early 2000s.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about, because when you talk about violent crime and, you know, at the local level, can you talk about police departments themselves and what role your office plays in whether it's setting standards or helping them figure out training? And there's a lot of follow questions to that, but, you know, the defund the police movement, I think, has been very, not I think, it has been very prominent, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means. And so if you could talk a little bit about, you know, police departments themselves, that would be.
Yeah. So look, I think community trust is always really important for prosecutors to build and police departments to build. And that's not always easy, even under the best of circumstances. And we are not in this day and time in the best, under the best of circumstances. So we, you know, before COVID, we were doing a lot of work in this office to reach the community through something which are called expungement clinics. So under Rhode Island law, you're entitled to getting your record expunged if you meet certain criteria. You're entitled to it under the law. The problem is people of color, people who are poor, don't often know whether they're eligible or not, because you've got to get your record and then you got to analyze your records. Those rules are fairly complex. So we did 3 expungement clinics back in last winter, and we've now moved them online to help people get those answers. And we've had, you know, astoundingly, the number of people who are eligible who come to us is over 50%. So if you think about that for a minute, they're entitled to expungement. They don't know how to get it. If they do get it, it puts them for purpose of employment in a very different place than they would be if they can't get it expunged. I mention that because that's one means by which we build community trust. You know, that's more important today than ever. So how do we as prosecutors here in Rhode Island try to impact and build community trust? You know, part of that is to make sure that the public knows that in those instances, and they're the rare instance, on balance, they are the rare instance, but in those instances where a police officer steps over the line and does not follow their training and commits an act that could be a criminal offense, that the public has to understand and be confident that we're going to be able to step in and do a review of that conduct. And we took steps in June of this year. We implemented what's called our use of force protocol, whereby whenever a police officer is involved in uses deadly force. Now that deadly force could be justified, but whenever they use deadly force, or whenever they use force that results in serious bodily injury, or whenever they are alleged to have used excessive force, even if that's only a misdemeanor, then my office will step into that case, investigate it along with the police department and with the Rhode Island State Police to bring an independent set of eyes to that investigation. And the whole point of that exercise is so that the involved police department isn't seen and viewed as investigating itself. It's to bring another set of eyes to it. Now that puts me in my office sometimes in a very delicate place, right? The community wants you to go to a certain place. Certainly those, police departments or police unions may think you're going too far. Our goal is, and I'm confident we do this, is to get it right and to bring our experience and judgment to bear on getting it right. But, I wish these cases were clear, I wish these cases in every instance were incredibly clear as to what the right result should be early on, but sometimes it just takes time to get there. And in today's day and age, the public's patience is not real high. So we're constantly balancing those two things, getting it right, but getting it done fast.
The record expungement that you talked about, is that kind of unique to Rhode Island, or is it a movement that is national in any way, shape, or form? Because that's such a unique program.
Yeah, I don't know that there are other instances of doing it the way
Yeah.
we've done it here in Rhode Island. I mean, we really enjoy doing that. Basically how it worked is we did it in the evening because people can't come in during the day; they have jobs,
Mhm.
and so we did it at a community college in Newport, not far from where I live. We did it at a nonprofit in Providence, and we did it in our community office. We have a community office in sort of an urban, a really urbanized area of Providence. And so took about 17 or 18 of my employees to run them. And the way it worked is basically this: you would come in and give your name and give your social security number so we could run your record. And then so our Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which maintains the database of records, would run the record. And then one of our prosecutors would go over it and see which charges could be expunged, all of them, some of them, perhaps none of them, depending on whether the standards fit, and then would sit with the person and walk them through it. If they were eligible, we'd have them fill out the necessary court paperwork, get it notarized. It's hard for people to find a notary sometimes, and then tell them exactly where to go with that paperwork to get it done. And then when they got to court, of course, we're on the other side and we could help that happen. I like to think we're really helping people there. And look, if, some of the faces I would see, a mother with a child who was eligible, that's really meaningful for that mother and the child. I mean, she's able potentially to get a better job based on now having a clean record that she's entitled to have and just didn't know how to execute that. So part of it, I think, is doing good work, which is why we're in public service in the first place. But I hope it gives the community insight into who we are as people and as prosecutors that they don't see otherwise. They typically only see us at the other end of a defense table. So it's a different way of them seeing us, and hopefully builds trust. And it also lets our prosecutors see defendants as people and not just as defendants. And they think about the impact of the sentencing recommendations they're making when they're in court. So when you're recommending, just so to put this in perspective, if somebody in Rhode Island gets a 10-year suspended sentence at age 18 on a felony offense, okay, and never commits another crime, they can't get that expunged for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's not until you're 38 that you can get that expunged. So when we're making our recommendations, there may be cases where a 10-year suspended sentence is entirely appropriate. But if it's longer than necessary, it has a real impact on people. And look, I talked to that young man who had one offense. I think he'd received stolen goods at 18, got a 10-year suspended sentence, had never committed another offense, wanted to work with his uncle and brother at the state prison as a correctional officer, and just had to wait another year to be able to apply for and presumably get that job. So the sentencings that we recommend have an impact. Look, sometimes long sentences are warranted and necessary, but it gives our prosecutors a chance to see the real life impacts of what we're doing. And if that makes them more thoughtful, that's consistent with what we talked about at the beginning of our conversation.
And so this podcast is all about the Portuguese perspective on things, right? And so Rhode Island having the largest percentage, not in number, but the largest percentage of Portuguese population of all 50 states. I imagine there's a number of Portuguese police officers. There may be some Portuguese in your office. Would you say that there's anything, I guess, do the Portuguese offer a certain, I don't know, style? Does the role of the community come into play? What have you seen, with the community there that might be specific to the Portuguese?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if there's one thing I take from my Portuguese background, and I would see this when I was in private practice, and I'd come down from Boston, and I'd go to a courthouse in Brockton, and I'd go to the courthouse in Fall River, and you knew that the people who were maintaining that courthouse were Portuguese. And that historic courthouse in Fall River, I think it's no longer being used as a courthouse. This is back in the early 90s, was pristine. It was beautiful. It was well cared for. To me, what being Portuguese has always meant, and what my grandfather and father really instilled in me, whether directly or indirectly, just by me observing them, was how hard they worked and how committed they were to getting it right. And frankly, their integrity. Both my father and grandfather had just such unassailable integrity. And I think that's a theme that you see through the Portuguese community, and you see it here in the office, and you see it amongst police officers, that there's attention to detail. There is an effort to get it right. And so I do see that as I interface with the Portuguese community. In the state, we have a Portuguese judge on the Superior Court who was one of my former colleagues, Judge Matos. Got on the Superior Court. Time goes by, probably maybe now almost a decade. He's just been a terrific judge. Not just as a member of the Portuguese community, but just as a judge generally. But how great is it to see, sort of a leading member of our Portuguese community on the bench in Rhode Island, setting such a standard of integrity and good thinking and judicial excellence. I think it's just really been great.
You're talking about the Portuguese community, and because you said that you were the first in your family to graduate from college, and there's still a lot of young Portuguese Americans that are just going into college now, that their parents were immigrants. Those who came, at a much later time, that second wave of immigration that you're familiar with, that came, in the 1960s and 70s, and some of them, their grandparents immigrated, but their parents weren't able to go to college for many reasons. And so, what would you, as a kind of a little bit of advice, or a little bit of a way to give some good pointers to those young people who are just going to college, whose grandfather or great grandparents were immigrants, but their parents did not have a chance to go to college, and they're the first in their family to experience the same thing that you experienced a few years ago, and now to look at into getting into the professional world? Any bits of advice that you would give to and I go through that as someone who teaches that students sometimes get into college, and they have, of course, lots of ideas and lots of idealism, and then the real world sets in, with college, as far as now today with the pandemic, but even before that with college debt and everything else that you said. That's one of the reasons why you went, of course, to the private end. And so sometimes students get distracted and also discouraged. Is it really worth it, all that I'm doing, for this, to be the first in my family to go to college? A little bit of advice to these young people would be great. We'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard because you look to your parents for such guidance and support. And my children, have one's graduated from college, and one is still there. And I know they talk to me and my wife a lot about sort of what courses to take and what major should I take and what should I do in my summers. And if I'm going to apply to, like my son, as I mentioned, is in medical school, should I take a year off between now and med school? And that's a lot harder if you don't have a parent who, it's not the parent's fault, obviously. You only can have the experiences you've had. And my parents worked really hard and emphasized education and really encouraged me. And so I guess my words for them are this, which is, there will be times, I suppose, when that will be obvious to you, that the places to get answers aren't as easy for you as they are for others. But you can get those answers, and you can get those answers by, reaching out and talking to people. I'm so impressed today. And I think email in a sense makes it easier than it was when we were younger. I get emails all the time from students, and I never, there's a young man who's coming in today who just graduated from law school and is starting his career as a clerk for a judge and just wants to come in and talk to me about sort of my experiences. I think he's interested in public service at some point. I don't know this young man, but I'm happy to meet with him. And I can't think of anybody who has sort of reached sort of the position that I'm in or the positions that you folks are in that wouldn't sit down with a young person and talk to them about life choices or professional choices or college choices. And I would really encourage young people to just send somebody an email. You can send it out of the blue. This young man I'm going to meet with later on today, send me his law review article from Boston College Law School, where I went and said, look, I read your article. Here's mine. I'd love to sit and talk to you. No one is not going to meet with you. And even if the first person said no, the next 10 would say yes. So I would look to, your high school teachers, if you're not in college yet, find a professor, they have office hours. They'd be happily sit with you. Find someone in a profession you're interested in and make phone calls. One of my sons is an engineering student. He's interested in aeronautical engineering. I'm not sure how he did it, but he has identified people in that industry and has spoken to them about career options. I would really encourage young people to do that. And also this, don't feel limited. Don't feel limited by where you're starting from. I've been very lucky, to sort of end up where I've ended up. And I had no grand plan. Trust me, I had no grand plan other than to go to college and try to graduate and go to law school and try to graduate and get a job and get those loans paid off. And then just sort of work hard and then sometimes, life just gives you opportunities that you're just not expecting. But there's, anyone who tells you, I used to laugh, people when I was young would say to me, do you want to be a judge someday? And I don't think I'll ever be a judge. It's not really something I have a lot of interest in, but you can't really plan to be a judge. No one at 25 really plans to be a judge. Work hard, ask lots of questions, do something you love, and life will work out. And occasionally that bolt of lightning will hit, and as it did for me, frankly, and you'll get opportunities that you don't think you're going to get. When I became U.S. Attorney, and I'll stop here so you can ask another question, but when I was nominated by President Obama to be U.S. Attorney, one of my former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office who'd retired and had a wry sense of humor emailed me and said, this is this is as shocking as the colonists winning the American Revolution here. I was not a well-known figure when I became U.S. Attorney, so it can happen to anybody.
So I think it's fair to say any Portuguese American students out there in Rhode Island who are looking at, pursuing this line of work or just want to have a conversation, they can send you an email and
absolutely
set up a meeting.
Absolutely.
We are coming up on the end, but I do want to just bring it back to our original topic briefly and get your perspective on what are some of the misconceptions that people have when the words law enforcement reform are mentioned, or for example, defund the police, because my personal opinion is that the word defund is a little extreme because I know that's not exactly what is meant by that movement. Again, my personal,
right.
My personal view, but it is a very confusing term and there's lots of different opinions. And so what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have, and what does a movement like that actually look like, whether it's a city police department or a statewide law enforcement, criminal justice? Can you just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think that, that's a conversation we're having here in Providence, and it's a conversation we're having vocally and loudly. And I think it's great that we're having it vocally and loudly. What defund the police means to me, what it ought to mean to me, is you can't not invest in police departments. I really think, for example, that body cameras will really make policing more transparent and more credible. I just think it will. We'll know exactly what happened. We won't, credibility won't be an issue. But we can't get body cameras on every police officer in the state unless we invest in police. Providence has them, Newport has them, and our other 37 cities and towns, including the state police, do not. So we can't defund police and have the tools we need to make policing better. Cameras is one aspect of that. Training is another. I do think, though, that we need to invest in other areas. What we don't do in the criminal justice system very well is invest in the things that will make policing better and make crime go down in a lot of ways. I think if we invested in probation and parole, we would have a much greater impact on reducing crime. If we're not actively working with people on the back end of the criminal justice system, meaning when they come out of prison to get back into the workforce, if we're not working with them at that point, we are not going to get good results, and we don't invest enough there. And I'm going to give you a very quick example. Federal system, 83% of when I was a U.S. attorney, 83% of people who were employable, meaning they did not have a significant physical or mental health disability that would prevent them from working, 83% were back in the workforce within weeks of getting out of federal prison, where they had served on average longer sentences for more serious crimes than state prisoners. State prisoners getting out of the state prison were at about 43% employed after getting out. What's the difference? The difference is this. The difference is this. Federal probation officers are carrying 25 to 30 cases per person. The state system, they're carrying well over 200, maybe over 300. If we don't invest in probation and parole to help get these people getting out of prison back into society, we're going to bear all of those costs. As I mentioned earlier, another victim, which is a problem, back to prison, which is a cost, and we're losing them as human capital, right? People can get out of prison, turn it around, do great things, but they're not going to be able to do that alone, and particularly not in today's environment.
This well said, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it's. I also wanted to say that I fully agree with when you talked about discretion and having discretionary power when sentencing, and because every case is different, right? And I think that can be applied to lots of different issues, even let's say immigration, right? Which is a whole other podcast. So yeah, I mean, Denise, I don't know if you had another follow-up question to that.
I don't want to abuse your time, Attorney General, but the dialogue between the states and the federal government right now, how do you see it at the Attorney General's office with the Department of Justice? How is that dialogue continuing, and how important is that dialogue, independently of where and who's running the Department of Justice, with the different state Attorney Generals throughout the country? How important is that dialogue with the justice system between the state level and the national level?
Yeah, look, it should be really, really close. You know, I have a good relationship with my counterpart, who's the U.S. attorney now, who actually, it's Rhode Island after all, it's small and everybody knows everybody. The current U.S. attorney was the appellate chief in this office when I took over. So we are close. We've known each other a long time. We have a great relationship. The problem, I think, is at the national level, there isn't that same level of interest. You know, there is a committee that I actually serve on, I think because I was the U.S. attorney, that meets with the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr. We had one meeting last August and we haven't met since, even virtually. I think that's a tremendous mistake. I think that we need to be acting collectively in law enforcement. There are lots of cases that spill over state boundaries, that implicate state and federal interests just criminally. And then there are all the civil matters. And that really, you know, we are almost unique as AGs go. Myself and the AG in Delaware and the AG in Alaska are really unique amongst AGs in that we have all of the civil jurisdiction and all of the felony criminal jurisdiction. Many, if not most, AGs don't have that. But step out of the criminal justice system for a minute. The civil matters, environmental matters, consumer matters, trade matters, where AGs, antitrust matters, big tech, cyber, where AGs are really there as the people's lawyer to protect the people of their states. We need to work closely with the federal government. And I don't feel personally like those lines of communication are open and are being well used. I think we can certainly improve there. It's never easy because the federal government, the mothership, has its own sort of way of doing business, but I don't think it's as strong as it could be. And I think there's definitely room for improvement.
Well, and hopefully we will see it improve in the coming years. Attorney General, this has been so informative and really insightful. I mean, I think we learned some things about what Rhode Island is doing that would probably be well served that other states would follow suit. And so this has been really great. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to have you give one last comment, and that would be anyone out there that's looking to get involved in your line of work or in criminal justice, law enforcement, anything. Any last words of advice?
Yeah, look, I mean, to me, I've loved public service. I represented corporate clients, mostly a good one back, in the early days of my career. But for the last, well, since 1996, 25 years, I've been able to represent the people of the state. I mean, when I was a trial lawyer, I walked into the courtroom and I said, I'm here on behalf of people of the state of Rhode Island or on people of the United States. That's a tremendous privilege. And I can't commend public service enough, even if it's only for a portion of your career. I say this, we have some young interns who come in here every summer and do work here in the office, law students mostly. And I say to them, look, some of you may not be in a position to do public service either right away or for as long as I've done it. But if you can do it even for a short period of time, I think you'll get a great benefit from it and you will give back to the public. I've loved it. I really try to encourage it amongst young people. I think, today there's such a spirit of involvement among young people, which I think is terrific. And look, I would encourage anybody who has any interest in Rhode Island or from afar, even in interacting with me, that the number here is 274-404-4400, and just ask for my assistant and we'll be able to connect in some way. But yeah, I would just encourage people to stay active. And if you have an opportunity to do public service, I would do it. You'll take great satisfaction for it, and the public will be really well served by you choosing to do that.
Thank you. Those are inspiring words and an inspiring career. I mean, I have to say, it impressive and inspiring. It's inspiring to those of us, as myself came from the Azores at the age of 10, so I can imagine your ancestors how proud they are of your achievements. Because as a fellow Azorian and a fellow Portuguese, I'm very and way here in California, very proud of your work and your inspiration to young people. Thank you so much for such an inspiring story, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much for your time. And so we hope that those who are listening in, whether it was on the podcast or on Facebook or even on YouTube, that you found this conversation inspiring. And again, Attorney General left his phone number right here for anybody to call and set up an appointment. So take advantage. But thank you
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
very much
Thank
for your
you.
time, Attorney General.
Thank you.
Best of
Thank you.
luck. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Inspiring.
everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.